in this morning. It is good to Zoom see everybody and to have the chance to be together this morning. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation and presentation with Rabbi Eric Gurvis on a personal level, because it's the chance to get to learn with my teacher and my mentor on an area that he has been profoundly passionate about as of late. The topic came out of conversation that he and I were having about trying to find opportunities to bring us among our congregations, among the Berkshire community together, if we even also can't be together physically ourselves. And so by way of frame this morning, I keep thinking about how in the midst of Passover and in the midst of COVID, we find ourselves in an interesting time and place in which our tradition and our holidays speak to us. Passover is that time where we celebrate the moving from oppression to freedom, from constriction and restriction to that of release. That's the story of heading from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, from the narrow places, into Bamidbar, into the wilderness, and on our journey on our own. And so the question on my mind as we start this morning is, how do we actually help that process along for ourselves, from oppression to freedom, from constriction to release? How do we actually find some surety as we wander through our own wilderness? And given the challenges that this period of time is presenting to us, what a better time to be focusing on our spiritual wherewithal in the midst of real challenge for each of us. It's going to be my job this morning to watch after our tech. So a few pieces of housekeeping as we get started. As Rabbi Gurvis likes to tease me, I am a digital native, and so I'll be watching after a few things this morning. So in just a moment, we're going to get to be welcomed from Derek Hoffman, the executive director of the Jewish Federation of the Berkshires. I want to say thank you to Dara and to the Federation for sponsoring this morning's webinar and making this possible, and for partnering to be able to offer this to the whole community. Seeing how many registrants we have is a real testament to, I think, what this topic is going to mean for a lot of us today. So Dara, thank you. You have a chat box at the bottom of your screen if you're on a desktop. I forget if you're on a mobile device where that chat box lives, but you all have one. And so as we start up this morning, if you would like to ask a question as we move along, both Rabbi Gurvis and I will be watching after the chat box to monitor questions and make sure they're answered. Also, inside of the chat box or along the bottom of your window, you should also have a way to raise your hand. While we can't turn on your webcam, this format doesn't allow for that, we can unmute you so that you can ask questions as part of this, and so we'll have the chance for some actual dialogue as part of it. Finally, we're going to be recording today's conversation as a way to be able to share this out to those who weren't able to join this morning, so that this can then continue to be a gift to others in our community after this live session is over itself. So once again, let me just say good morning. It's good to see everybody, and as much as we can see everybody, and we will get started. Please, Dara.
Well, good morning, everyone. Oh, it says I'm muted. Let me unmute.
We can hear you.
You unmuted me. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. Even though I can't see your faces, I can see all of your names, and I see the chats going alongside on the side of my screen, so that's wonderful. First of all, I want to thank Neil for bringing this to us. It's a wonderful opportunity, and also to Rabbi Eric Gurvis, thank you so much. I love that you are in our community over the summer, and we're very blessed to have really talented people who come to us and share with us their knowledge, and so we're really pleased and grateful for you to be here with us today. I love how you said, Neil, wandering in the wilderness, because I know for myself, I have felt like I have been in the wilderness more than once. Kind of, you think you're going down the right path and making progress, and then suddenly, you find yourself a little bit off path. And that's been happening throughout this time period for myself personally, professionally. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity for all of us. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to wish you all a happy Passover. I hope that everybody is healthy and safe, and that with our learning today, we will continue to remain resilient as we move forward.
Thank you, Dara. So without further ado, let us learn with Rabbi Eric Gurvis.
Good morning, everybody. It is an honor and a blessing to be with you. I only wish I could see your faces, because that has been one of the many learnings we've all had in this open-ended time of transition and uncertainty and fear. And this is our new reality. It's at least part of our new reality. I'm imagining, I can't ask you to raise your hands because we can't see you, but I imagine that many of us on this call this morning celebrated some part of these last few days, the first part of Pesach, on Zoom, on FaceTime, on Skype, on whatever format you use to socially connect online. And while I often think that technology is a bane, I won't say the bane of our existence, we are seeing the upside of technology in a very big way in this time. And it's a blessing to be with you. And as Dara alluded, the Berkshires are very much home for me. I started working at the Eisner camp in Great Barrington in 1973 and worked there till the mid-'80s, at which point I moved. My career took me around the country a little bit. I worked in other camps in the URJ system. My wife is currently the associate director of the Eisner camp and the Boston office of Eisner and Crane Lake in West Stockbridge. Actually, my middle son is one of the assistant directors at Crane Lake in West Stockbridge. My children grew up at Eisner, and we have a home in Otis, where actually 3 of our children were sheltering for the last 2 weeks after we convinced them to get out of New York. So the Berkshires are very much part of our life, and not just in the summer. And so it feels good to be with one of my communities. And I look down the list of participants, and there are people from some of the groups that I lead and communities I'm involved with back here in the greater Boston area, but I also see some of my friends from the Mussar groups that I've been working with over the past summers at Chevra in Great Barrington, and Rabbi Hirsch, Neil, and I have been in conversation about the possibilities for what we might yet do this summer. I think we're all aware, and you in the Berkshires maybe even more so, because so much of the reality for the Berkshires depends on the summer and the uncertainty about what will be this summer, with the announcements that Williamstown and Jacob's Pillow, basically around the corner from our house, have already decided to close, and everybody's holding their breath about Tanglewood. And so it's going to be a very different summer no matter what. It's going to be a very different future, because there's just no way we're not changed by this experience. So what Neil has asked me, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, is to share a little bit this morning about some resources that are within our own Jewish tradition. Neil said that it's something that I've had a passion for of late. My road to this part of our Jewish tradition and spiritual heritage, actually, I keep losing track, but I think it dates back the better part of a decade at this point. And it almost happened by accident. As Rabbi Hirsch could tell you, I'm a strong proponent of regular study for its own sake, Torah Lishma. And so I've had a Chevruta, a study buddy for a very long time. My current partner and I started as a group of 4 in 2004. Then we were 3, then we were 2, and we are still 2, and we still study even in this this format, in spite of whatever else is going on. And we very, very rarely miss a week of our study, because it's so essential to who we are and what we do. So it probably was about 9 years ago, I've lost track, that my partner said, you know, I love what we're studying, but would you mind if we do something different? And my response to that has almost always been, I don't care what I study, I care that I study. And so we took a little time and we realized that neither of us knew anything about Mussar, other than that it was supposedly the ethical part of Jewish tradition. And so we decided to dip our toes into the waters and get a taste of what the Mussar tradition might have to offer. I'm not going to take you through our whole journey, except to say that 8 or 9 years later, we now study Mussar on a regular basis. As Rabbi Hirsch could tell you, I left full-time congregational work almost 3 years ago and have spent much of my rabbinate since then teaching and leading Mussar groups around the Boston area and in the summers in the Berkshires, and studying Mussar and writing about Mussar, and in this past year, since last summer, working part-time for the Mussar Institute, about which I'll say more later on in this presentation. So let me share my screen so you can see what I'm going to be talking about. Neil, are we seeing the right screen?
We sure are.
Okay, great. So I've entitled this as Shaky as a Fiddler on the Roof, in part because we all know that there has been a lot of talk about Fiddler on the Roof. Most of us, if not all of us, have seen it 1, 2, or 12 times. It's been back on Broadway, at least until recently. It's coming back to Boston because I believe it's the 25th or the 35th or the 40th, I've lost track, anniversary of its original appearance. And we all know that image of life being as shaky as a fiddler on the roof. And our lives are shaky right now. And the subtitle, Jewish Spiritual Tools for Challenging Times, there in truth are many, and I will refer to some of them later on in the presentation and give you some places you can go, avenues you can go, and I'm sure that Dara and Rabbi Hirsch will be able to make the materials that I'm presenting available later on so that you don't have to be furiously writing down websites and links. But I do believe among the many resources that our tradition offers, and Passover, quite honestly, is a resource as well. I hope some of you had the chance to watch the Saturday night Seder that was put together and presented last night on, I think it was YouTube. If you did not watch it, I urge you to find it and spend the hour with the people, very creative people who came together to put together something that was truly inspiring. And I have to say, by the end, I was sitting there in tears because it just was, it so touched the soul, and some really creative and talented people came together to give us something to really grab hold of amidst the many things we're reaching out for in this time. So I'm going to be talking specifically about the Jewish spiritual practice of Mussar. And I actually have to say that the Berkshires play a role in it, because a number of summers ago when I was on sabbatical from my congregational work in Newton, and my wife and children were at the camp in Great Barrington, so I spent much of my summer that summer in Great Barrington, living in my wife's home on camp. And I spent several summers like this. And my practice was basically to sit in every coffee shop in the Berkshires, read, study when I could find someone to sit and talk with. And I knew I needed to find something to do that was more than sitting in coffee shops or reading books. And that led me to Kripalu. And Kripalu, I went to a week-long workshop, was only offered once, called Whole Self Well-Being. And there I was introduced to the practice of mindfulness. But this was around the same time that I was stepping into the waters of Mussar. And I came to realize that Mussar has authentically, as part of its regimen, if you will, its practice routines, mindfulness, focus, meditation. Meditation has been part of Jewish tradition for a very long time, and as it is in other traditions. And for many people, there's almost this disconnect. Can this be authentically Jewish when it seems to come from Eastern Buddhism, Hinduism, and other traditions? And the answer is these were parallel tracks, and there is nothing inauthentic about mindfulness and meditation in Judaism. So I sort of came onto these two paths around the same time, and the fact that they interwove and interconnected was profoundly meaningful for me. So first, a little bit of background about Musar. The term Musar is in the Bible. It means instruction. And we have instructions, guidance, teachings about Musar all the way down through Jewish history. In the 9th or 10th century, we have a famous rabbi by the name of Bachya ibn Pekuda, who writes a book about the concepts of Musar. How do you be a better person? And largely in the context of much of the traditional Musar writing, that is couched in how do you be the best person you're capable of being in your service to God. And that is definitely a major part of Musar. However, it's not the only way to get on that path, or at least think about the issues raised within Musar. So starting in the 9th or 10th century, we begin to get the development of a literature that we would subsequently come to call the Musar literature. And different figures, including Moses Maimonides, write books that we would put on the shelf and call Musar literature. And that began to hit a peak in the 16th, 15th, 16th, 17th centuries. And in the early 19th century, a young Lithuanian rabbi by the name of Yisrael Salanter, you're seeing a picture of Rav Salanter on your screen, decided that he wanted to try something with his yeshiva students at his school. And these were young teenage boys. And he decided that they would take an hour a day away from their traditional studies, which was primarily Talmud and other forms of studying the halacha, the traditional Jewish law, and they would dip into the Musar literature, but not just to read and study the Musar literature, but to think about how to live it. And he developed a format for Musar practice, which involved some meditation, which involved some study, which involved what he called Kabbalot practices, where you would work on a particular theme, and I'll get to that in a moment, within the Musar tradition, and you would actually practice that, living out that soul trait, that midah, in your life. And then the last piece was to do some cheshbon haNefesh, some accounting of your soul, which took the form and takes the form of journaling. Salanter's innovation was not met with wide appreciation. This is Eastern Europe in the 18th century. The Hasidic communities and movement that were unfolding rejected this. The hardcore yeshiva world, the Misnagdim as they're sometimes known, rejected this. How dare you take any time away from the study of Gemara, of Talmud? And mind you, when Salanter made this suggestion, that hour away from Talmud was like at 11 o'clock at night. It wasn't during the peak learning moments of the day. Nonetheless, it was not a very popular innovation, a popular lowercase r reform in the Jewish community of that time. But like Israel Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, Salanter had disciples, and he trained his disciples in his method, and he sent them out to establish their own yeshivot, their own schools. And I won't take you through all of that history, but they did. And so Musar schools and the spread of Musar communities picked up and spread throughout Europe, and Eastern Europe, and eventually to Western Europe, and eventually to the land of Israel, and eventually beyond. Today, you will find Musar communities all over the world. So the best one-line definition of Musar for me is this one. Rabbi Elia Lopian, who was the student of one of Salanter's disciples, defines Musar as making the heart feel what the mind already knows. So for example, let's take one soul trait, one midah. The core word in Musar is midah or midot in the plural. Midah means a measure, midot measures, but what we really mean are virtues or soul traits. My teacher, Alan Marinis, who I'll say more about in a little bit, he likes the word soul traits, and I find that very useful. So let's take one, anavah, humility. Anavah is almost always the starting point of a Mussar exploration, a Mussar journey, as I like to call it. Now, we know we're supposed to be humble, but there are moments in our life where we also have to stand up for ourselves and express some element of pride and self-assurance. And yet there are times when either we or people we have met seem to have nothing but self-assurance. So every midah is along a spectrum, from one extreme to the other extreme. From an absence of the midah, let's say an absence of humility, to humility in the extreme. So much humility that you are willing to basically lay down for anyone or anything else and be a doormat. What's the ideal? The ideal is somewhere in the broad middle, not a precise middle. And it's not an unchanging middle, because as we are experiencing very distinctly right now, life will consistently throw curveballs and challenges. So we have to make adjustments. So the Mussar practice and journey is about making the adjustments so that we can maintain our balance so our lives are not shaky like the life of a fiddler on the roof. And so sometimes we have to lean a little bit this way to get back towards the middle. Sometimes we have to lean a little bit this way. Maimonides, in his 8 chapters, his introduction to his commentary on Pirkei Avot, which is a beloved text of Jewish tradition and one that we traditionally study in this season between Pesach and Shavuot, says sometimes you have to go all the way to the extreme to get yourself back past the middle so you can come back to the middle. So with humility, absolute lack of humility, absolutely too much humility, neither is the ideal. The ideal is somewhere in the middle. And so, for example, my teacher, Alan Marinis, has a meditation phrase, a focus phrase for humility. No more than my place, no less than my space. I shouldn't take up more, whether it's airtime in a conversation or a class setting. And that's actually a tricky one to practice when you're in a situation like I am, where I can only see myself and I'm the only voice talking in the room. But no more than my place, leave room for others. No less than my space. Don't sit back and just let it be as if you're not there. And so we're constantly balancing. So let me give you an idea of what we mean by the midot. This is one graphical representation. I'm going to give you the reference later on to where this comes from. Comes from a fabulous film by filmmaker Tiffany Shlain called The Making of a Mensch. And again, towards the end, I'll give you the website. And so this is what she calls the periodic table of mensch qualities. This is not the only list. It is not the most complete list, but I wanted something that would represent some of the qualities. And every person has every midah. Every person has every trait, albeit in different measures. Alan would put it that we each have our own soul curriculum. For some of us who may have humility, for example, well in hand, maybe we have more of a need to work on gratitude or courage or trust. For someone who has an abundant amount of kindness, of chesed, maybe they need to work more on humility and actually taking their place and not simply being ready to do anything for anyone without any concern for their own needs and safety, a lesson we're learning in this time. So Yitzirah, I'll just read the English titles in the interest of time. Creativity and curiosity, bravery, perseverance, love, responsibility, forgiveness, gratitude, These are all soul traits, and again, there are lists and lists. There's one list that I've seen that has well over 300 midot. I don't know that I would call all of those soul traits, but when you are part of a Mussar journey, you simply focus on one at a time. And usually you do it in the context of what's called a VAD or a Mussar group. So for example, the groups that I work with back here in the Boston area, or when I'm in the summer out near you, is that we have a group, we meet weekly or bi-weekly, and we spend a little bit of time sharing how our work on a particular soul trait is going. We do a little bit of learning and meditation and learning. Sometimes there's chanting involved to amplify the meditation. And we talk about how we can better practice. And again, go back to Rav Lopian. This is making the heart know what the mind already knows. We know we're supposed to be humble. We know we're supposed to express gratitude. We know we're supposed to show honor. We know that we should summon the best form of strength and courage, two midot that are very relevant in a time like this. And another teacher of mine, Rabbi Avi Fertig, with whom I work at the Musar Institute, lives in Beit Shemesh, Israel, would say that Mussar is meant to help us be the best version of the person we are capable of being by working one by one on the soul traits. And it's not one and done. Traditionally, you work on a soul trait. Actually, there's a list of 13. You do them in the original model from the 19th century. You do them each one for a week, and then at the end of the 13 weeks, you go back and start again at the top of the list. And at the end of the 26th week, you go back and start again at the top of the list. And at the end of the 39th week, you go back and start again at the top of the list. And at the end of that cycle, 4 cycles, 52 weeks, you've spent a year working on 13 midot. Now, the groups that I work with, we often go back to midot we've done before to hit them at a deeper level, but we also expand to other midot that we come up with along the way. And again, as I said, it's about balance. It's about not leaning all the way to one side or all the way to the other side, but trying to walk down something of a broad middle path. And sometimes we have to lean this way to catch our balance, and sometimes we have to lean that way. And it's very much about being mindful of what's going on. So what I want to do for the bulk of our time is just focus on 3 midot. 3 midot, 3 soul traits that I think are extraordinarily relevant in this time. The first is menuchat haNefesh. Literally, the words mean the calmness or the tranquility or the rest of the soul. We just finished celebrating Shabbat, and we talk about Shabbat menucha, Sabbath rest, which may include, but doesn't necessarily mean a Shabbos shluf, an afternoon nap. But Shabbat as a day out of the pattern of our regular lives and routines is meant to kind of help us reset the balance. Well, needless to say, we're out of all of our routines at this point. Shabbat, while it may be different even in this time, is still not so distinguished from the other days. I don't know about you, but I often wake up in the morning and I have a distinct problem until I either look at the newspaper, read the news, or look at my calendar, remembering what day of the week it is. Because we're living in a very small space right now. We're living within our homes. Some of us have the fortune to be able to get out, and as the weather gets better, that's even more of a blessing and more important that we get out and get some fresh air. But we're not allowed to go very far, and we're certainly supposed to keep our distance from those around us. And actually, it was pointed out on a webinar that I was on a number of years ago, that a number of weeks ago, see, it's all collapsing, a number of weeks ago, that rather than calling it social distancing, we should really use the words physical distancing. Because gathering here in this setting for this period of time this morning is social. Our Seders in Zoom and FaceTime and Skype were social. Most of the congregations that I know, my small one here in Metro West Boston included, is having some kind of a gathering on Friday evenings. Some of us had congregational Seders in Zoom. So we're not completely socially disconnected. In fact, we're learning how to connect in ways we never dreamed. Rabbi Hirsch is correct that for the years that we worked together in Newton, which were an incredible blessing for me, I would kid him that he was a digital native because he understood the technology and how to use it, and he was the one who pushed me into social media and all of that. But absent this, we would feel even more isolated. So menuchat haNefesh, the first of the traits, the midot that I want to spend a few minutes on, is most often described as equanimity. And we don't know. We don't know how to maintain our equanimity in a time like this. We know what brings us comfort, we know what we enjoy, but now the days are really long. I mean, from a clock standpoint, they're no longer than they've ever been before. But time moves more slowly when we don't have to be anywhere. We don't have to go anywhere, or we're not permitted to go anywhere. And, celebrating our festival of freedom in a time when freedoms that we took for granted, just running down the corner, we're out of this, I'll go to the supermarket. Not so simple anymore. Let's go to the movies. We don't have anything to do. There's that great new movie they're showing where Rabbi Hirsch can tell you, anybody who knows me can tell you that I'm an avid Red Sox fan. And for those of you in the Berkshires who are New York based, I'm originally a New Yorker, love the Mets. This is really hard to not have the things that typically anchor us and mark time, like spring training and opening day, and the ability to go to a place like Fenway, which has its own unique holiness to it. And I don't mean in a sacred sense, but there's something for those who are sports fans magical about that experience, or going to live concerts, or going to art museums. And I don't have to tell people who spend either their entire year or significant portions of it in the Berkshires how much we treasure and value the rich opportunities that we have in a place like the Berkshires. And to be denied that is to be denied a freedom we've taken for granted. And we're going to all be different after this. We have to be different. And we don't even have a clue what that's really going to mean and what's going to survive. So finding our equanimity, finding our balance, creating a new routine takes intentionality. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Leffin was not a Mussar guy. He was actually part of the Haskalah, the Enlightenment. But his book, Cheshbon haNefesh, The Accounting of the Soul, slim little book on 13 different soul traits, was the first book from the, let's say, the collection of riches that existed within Jewish literature, Jewish ethical literature, by the time that Salanter formed the Mussar movement. That was the first book that he went and republished. This is a book of Mussar, we should learn it. And by the way, Leffin's book was deeply influenced by another practice, by another figure we've all heard of. His name was Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin had a virtues practice. And some of the structure of the Mussar movement and some of the virtues that Leffin wrote about in his book, Cheshbon haNefesh, were taken directly from the list that Franklin used for his own virtue practice. So there's a confluence there as well. So at the beginning of his chapter on equanimity, Rabbi Leffin says, rise above events that are inconsequential, both bad and good, for they're not worth disturbing your equanimity. I dare say, and it's based not just on my own observation, but the conversations I've been having in Zoom and over the phone, and when it's possible with members of the family, at least in person, neighbors, just as we're at an appropriate distance passing on the street. We're learning to reorient and reassess our priorities in this time. Things that we thought were exceptionally good, maybe we're learning that they're not so important anymore. And things that seem in a moment really bad, and I'm not minimizing what we're going through is really bad, especially because of the potential for where this could all lead. But again, it's about not getting hung up on the extremes, the really good and the really bad, and trying to take a fresh, healthy look at what is really important in our lives. I quipped to my family yesterday that this is probably the time, I have not read much, I've listened to a little bit, this is probably the time for a lot of us to think about some of the lessons that Marie Kondo has been teaching in the art of tidying up and her subsequent works. Because that too is about how do we reset our lives? Do we really need as many things as we have? Do we really need all the things that we would like to have? Does it bring us joy? And I think that her philosophy is very much related to this principle of equanimity. A contemporary teacher on the same theme writes that worrying, and let's face it, we're all worried. Some to a greater degree, some to a lesser degree. And those who've been in my Mussar groups know that da'aga, worry, is another midah, it's another soul trait. How do we learn to control the worry? When is it productive and useful, and when is it destructive? So Rab Pliskin writes, worrying destroys one's life. A life filled with worry, I would even add the word only worry, is a miserable existence. Regardless of how much good fortune you have in your life, you will be oblivious to it if you fill your mind with, and again, I'm going to add the word only, worrisome thoughts. You would hate someone for trying to destroy your life. If you only worry, you're destroying your own life. So in this time of uncertainty and challenge, how do I hold on to the worries because they're legitimate? Going to the supermarket is now, I don't want to call it capital D, dangerous activity, but it's not as innocuous as we assumed it was 6 weeks ago. Because it's not just about me, it's about all the other people. And I went in the last couple of days to the supermarket. Last night I went to the supermarket, first time in quite a while, to pick up some stuff that we needed because now we've doubled the population in our home. And you know, there were lines on the floors telling you which direction to go and where to stand when you get on the line for the checkout. And I noticed myself, even a week ago in a previous visit, you know, if I saw someone coming, I would stand to the side. But I noticed that people just weren't paying attention to the lines on the floor and the sense of order that the proprietors and the managers were trying to instill so that we could take care of one another. Because we're responsible for one another, we're responsible to one another. We're fighting something we can't see. I've felt healthy all along, but the possibility exists that I too could be a carrier and not even know it. And therefore I have a responsibility to the other. So we can't let that worry freeze us and immobilize us. At the same time, we can't set it aside. So it's a balance. So we have to see the good that we have in the context of the challenges that we're facing. One of Salanter's primary disciples was Rabbi Simcha Zissel Ziv of Kelm. And some of you are hearing Kelm and thinking Chelm, no. The wise men of Chelm, that's a different story for another day. Actually, it's a good set of teachings to read right now because it's a good diversion. But Kelm was not Chelm. And Rabbi Simcha Zissel Ziv, also known as the alter, the elder, the grandfather, as it were, of Kelm, was the creator of one of the three major schools that emerged in the early years of the Mussar movement. And he writes that a person who has mastered peace of mind, that's our menuchat haNefesh, has gained everything. Menuchat haNefesh is not a state you achieve and live in forever. It's something you reach for as often as you can grab hold of it. And in a time of uncertainty and rockiness like this, we need to find the moments and try to connect them so that it's not all bad news. By the way, I don't know about you, but I have found that one of the most valuable practices in trying to, as much as possible, establish and sustain some menuchat haNefesh is I've turned off the news. I hardly watch the news. I don't watch press conferences. I'm not saying I never watch, and I certainly read the news pretty deeply every morning. But then I don't allow myself to continue checking it throughout the day. I sit in front of this screen teaching and preparing and in meetings, and I've taken to staying away from the news sources on the other screen. At the end of the day, I go and I take a peek back at the headlines and see what I missed. But watching the news is really, really destructive. And while there are horrible things happening around us, and we want to know when the peak will be, and we want to know where the spread has moved to, and we want to know what our leaders are thinking about and what they're proposing, it doesn't change so dramatically hour by hour. And it really is destructive to equanimity to be constantly tuned in. So the answer is to tune out. To obtain peace of mind, you need to be at peace with your emotions and desires. And one of the protections we can provide for ourselves is to step away. Not entirely. For some people, it's entirely. But substantially, because we live in a news-obsessed culture. Checking Facebook 28 times an hour, or Twitter, or any of the other social media, it has a negative effect. Last comment on equanimity, and this one comes from Sylvia Boorstein, and I bring her deliberately. Sylvia's Jewish. She's got some wonderful teachings on mindfulness and how to bring it into our Jewish holidays and celebrations, but she's also a practicing Buddhist and well known for that. And in a book called Pay Attention for Goodness Sake, she writes, to perfect my equanimity, I need to accept every experience into my awareness. I cannot refuse to pay attention. Refusing itself, the mind tensing in withdrawal, is suffering. And turning the mind away, refusing to look, would preclude complete and clear seeing. When my mind greets all moments with equal respect, it maintains stature enough to see that causal connections set every experience into its proper time and place, and that everything is always breathtakingly the only way it can be. That's a key teaching in mindfulness. Mindfulness is being aware of this moment, this breath, and then the next, and then the next. And so this is part of the balance of acknowledging reality and at the same time not letting us sweep us away and take us into a spiral that can only lead us downward. There's enough that's depressing in today's world. We don't have to allow everything to seem out to defeat us. My heart resting in equanimity, in menuchat haNefesh, can respond with compassion. And one of the things we're learning day by day, week by week, is that we all need to work on chesed, on rachamim, compassion, for those we live with whom we're spending more time than we have in years, for those in our family circles, the people we work with, and we all know rachamim, compassion, for those who are on the front lines of this, the people we may not have noticed in forever, certainly the doctors and nurses and first responders who are, by going to work and doing their jobs, putting themselves in harm's way. But the people at the supermarket, the postal delivery people, anybody at the gas station, wherever it is, the people who are out there providing the truly essential services so that our world doesn't completely shut down, and who are doing so at a risk, they deserve our compassion and our appreciation. Which leads me to the next. The next midah I want to talk about for a few minutes is hakarat ha-tov. Literally means recognizing the good. We talk about it as gratitude. My colleague and teacher, Rabbi Nami Kelman, the Dean of Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, and it's an appropriate teaching because in these weeks, at this season, we're reading, except for this weekend during Pesach, we're reading the book of Leviticus, which is all about sacrifices, the manner and form in which our ancestors in ages gone by would express their gratitude, would express regret for sins and guilt, and would express their appreciation of their well-being, the zevach shlamim. And so we have all these categories of offerings, burnt offerings, korbanot, from an earlier time. And aren't we learning, as we read Leviticus, some deeper meanings and new meanings about the word sacrifice? I see there's a question up here, maybe. Yes, it is possible to speak louder. Let me get closer to my microphone. Thank you. So Rabbi Kelman writes, the offering of thanksgiving in the form of sacrifice, or later in our tradition in the form of prayer and study became the replacements for burnt offerings, is the highest expression of gratitude. We praise and we exalt and recognize the miracles of our lives. In the midst of thinking about all that we can't do and don't have in this moment, are we stopping to recognize what we do have? One of the key learnings for me, my wife and I are in a new home that we moved to in November. And our youngest son, who's a senior in college, theoretically, we should be celebrating his graduation 1 month from today, and that's not going to happen, has been home with us now for about 6 weeks. He came home for spring break, and he's still here. He's actually delighted that some of his siblings arrived last night so that he's not the only one here. But the reality that at least twice a day, we are now eating meals together. I don't remember the last time in my life, especially my working life, when I sat with my family at the table for meals, even once a day, let alone twice and sometimes 3 times. And that's a real blessing. I wouldn't have wanted this to get there, but this came. Nobody took my vote or my opinion about whether we should enter this time, and they didn't take yours either. But I'm trying to see the good. And part of the good is the time that I'm spending with my family. So deeper gratitude recognizes the simple gift of our lives, writes Rabbi Kelman, and the gifts of our daily lives. Some people keep gratitude journals. That can be a practice that can help us in a time like this. At the end of the day, just sit down and make a list of 3 things that you were grateful for that day. Sometimes it's really easy, sometimes there's an abundance, and sometimes it's a little harder, but that's stretching the muscle. That, in Mussar terms, is the practice of trying to strengthen our muscles so that our midot are even more sturdy and more steady. Rabbi Kelman writes, our rabbis, ancient and contemporary, are telling us that perhaps this is the practice we must really cultivate. The practice of thanksgiving, of hakarat ha-tov. But how? So Alan Marinas, who I mentioned earlier, I told you that Mussar starts in the Bible as a concept. From the 9th or 10th century, we begin to get the development of a Mussar literature. In the 19th century, the Mussar movement, which was nearly destroyed during the Holocaust, because it was primarily and profoundly an Eastern European movement. And so Mussar declined. There were still some Mussar yeshivot in traditional communities, but primarily Mussar disappeared until about 25, 30 years ago, when two figures independent of one another, I would like to say, gave a rebirth, a renaissance to the study and practice of Mussar. And they are Rabbi Ira Stone, a conservative rabbi who for many years was based in Philadelphia, with whom I've also had the privilege of studying. And he's got a book called A Responsible Life that is about Mussar and has a particular approach. And his book is very much about the altar of Kelm, whom I mentioned a few moments ago. And then there's Alan Marinis. Alan is my teacher, so I have a natural inclination towards his approach. And Alan is also a Renaissance man. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He worked in far reaches of the world in the Peace Corps. He was a very successful filmmaker and businessman, and then his life crashed. In the midst of that crash, he found his way to a yeshiva in Far Rockaway, New York, near JFK Airport, actually, and became a disciple of a teacher there, Rav Per, who taught him about Mussar. And Alan's life was so profoundly changed. He grew up in a Jewish family in Toronto, largely secular, cultural at best, and his journey into Mussar led him to deeper practice and observance, and eventually to creating the Mussar Institute, which seeks to promote the teaching and study and practice of Mussar truly all around the world. There is no physical location for the Mussar Institute. Virtually everything that goes on happens right here in cyberspace. And there's an annual kala, a gathering, a retreat. They just held, literally, they were lucky by 2 weeks. The second Israel Mussar tour, but primarily what we do at the Mussar Institute is here in the virtual world. So he's written 4 books. If you want to hear his story, you read Climbing Jacob's Ladder, which tells his story, but is also an introduction to Mussar. But I think his most important book is Everyday Holiness. I'm going to refer to it again later. And he writes about gratitude. When you open yourself to experience the trait of gratitude, you discover with clarity and accuracy how much good there is in your life. Whatever you are lacking will still be missing. Still be missing, of course. And in reaching for gratitude, no one is saying you ought to put on rose-colored glasses to obscure those shortcomings. We don't need to put on rose-colored glasses and say, everything is wonderful. Everything is not wonderful. Everything is not coming back at full force soon. Everything is not going to go back to exactly how it was. We're going to grow through this, and that's part of the spiritual journey. The obstacles to appreciating the good can also be very real, especially when life is riven by suffering. That is such a profoundly true statement in this time. But it is worth the effort to practice gratitude, especially since the one who benefits most is the one who is suffering. Recognizing the good affirms life, and more, because you see the good in the world, it sets your heart free to soar, to shout, and that should say to sing a song of life. When gratitude is well established and flowing, it is a sign that the heart has been made right and whole. Gratitude cannot coexist with arrogance, hence it's got to be practiced in tandem with humility. It cannot coexist with resentment. There is much about which people have anger and resentment about these past months and decisions that might have been made and could have been made and action. That's not going to get us stable today and tomorrow. We have to look at where we are and where we need to go. And gratitude cannot coexist with selfishness. You can't feel gratitude if you can't see or feel the presence or pain of the other. There's a brand new book on Mussar that came out in December. It's called the Mussar Torah Commentary, published by the Central Conference of American Rabbis. It is a book of commentary on each week's Torah portion, read through the lens of one of the midot primarily, and through the lens of Mussar, and I was very honored to be asked to contribute one of the chapters. And my chapter happened to be about a Torah portion that's coming up in a few weeks, Parshat Kedoshim, and I was asked to approach that portion through the lens of hakarat ha-tov, recognizing the good, which if you asked me would have not been the midah I would have necessarily chosen for that portion, which was a great challenge. And at the end of my chapter, I write this little, I guess it's a focus, I guess it's an intention that I try to remind myself about, especially in these days. Along the way, let us not lose the tov, the good within us and that which arises from us. Rather, let us shine light with hakarat ha-tov in recognition of the good that is in us. Let us utilize that light as a foundation on which to reach higher and higher in our pursuit of living the ideals of our tradition. We need to recognize, appreciate, and when we can, share the good, even in this time of deep challenge. So I have one more midah, which is emet, truth, but I think I want to take a pause and see if there are any comments or questions, because I've been talking a long time, and our intention was not for this to be simply a frontal presentation. So if you have a question, you can put it in the chat box. If you'd like to ask that question, maybe Rabbi Hirsch can rejoin me on the screen and help us moderate. And then depending on time, we'll either do truth or we'll go to the end materials that I have here. Welcome back, Rabbi Hirsch.
Thank you. Good to be seen.
Any comments, any questions about Mussar, about Jewish tradition, about, I'll be honest, when I can't answer a question, like when is this going to end?
So you should have two boxes, one that says Q&A and one that says chat, and you can put those questions in either one, and we'll be able to do that. I see that, Amy, you're raising your hand, and just give me 1 second. I can unmute you also, and that'll allow us to just hear you directly. So, Amy.
She's still muted, Neil.
I see that. So, Amy, go ahead. You're unmuted.
I actually just scrolled over the hand by mistake, but it was perfect for me, especially the quotations. I've been involved in a Facebook group which is called the Global Gratitude Jar, and I've been doing that for the past month. And I've had a gratitude practice. I've studied Mussar a few years ago, and what I find is that working with the Havruta really helps me be accountable and responsible to me, that it's very easy to say, oh, I'll forget this practice because it's just me. And we know how important it is to be accountable, and this helps me do that. And so it really is helping me become the best me that I can be.
So thank you, Amy. That's a great comment, and it goes with Barbara's question in the chat box. What is the role of feedback from others in working on the midot? So part of the reason that a Mussar practice, or a Mussar journey, as I like to describe it, is done really on three levels. There's obviously the internal and personal level. That's the meditation and the practices and the journaling. Chevruta, studying with someone else. And if you do true chevruta, it's never just about the text that you're reading together. It's also about the text of your life. That's always been true. I've been doing Chevruta since through rabbinic school, but also since my first year in the rabbinate a long time ago. And it's always been a valuable practice. It keeps me honest. It keeps me authentic. In Mussar, the Chevruta is done around whatever midah you're working on, which is usually in the context of the VAD, the Mussar group that I mentioned before. Now, everybody may have other midot that they want to work on, but when you're in partnership with a study partner and a group, you're all working on the same midah at the same time. And so there is an accountability. First of all, we learn from one another. If you only read and study anything, but I'll use Mussar since that's what we're here talking about, to yourself, all you hear are the voices in the echo chamber between your ears. But when you read and discuss a text with another person, there are suddenly, in truth, more than two voices, because 2 Jews, 3 opinions, 6 with inflation. So we absolutely gain more perspectives and more insights, and we get challenged and we challenge, and it keeps us in a feedback loop that is open rather than closed. So I'm a big proponent of Chevruta, which I do personally as well as encouraging those I work with, and of Mussar groups. Because when you're in a Mussar group, you have others to share the journey with. You get to share, like, I fell down here. I've said to a lot of my groups in recent weeks that, you know, inevitably, nobody is doing all of the parts of the Mussar practice at the same time. People fall off the wagon. And I said 4 or 5 weeks ago, as we moved into virtual meetings because we can't meet in person, now is the time, if you've fallen off on your focus phrase or on your journaling, now is the time to push yourself to get it back. And you don't have to be in a Mussar group to get started on that. I'll get back to that in a bit. Any other comments or questions?
So we have Alan Brandell has his hand raised, so let me just turn him on here. All right, Alan. Hello, good to hear you. Go ahead, Alan.
Good morning, Rabbi Gurvis. Thank you so much for a beautiful teaching. Neil, thank you for everything you do, and Ara, thank you for putting this together. You know, I've been studying Mussar for the last 4 years and facilitating a learning group for 3, and we got together 2 weeks ago, and by coincidence, we studied the Hitlamdut and we studied gratitude because of how important that was. I just wanted to share a quote that we spoke about during our class with respect to awareness that we all thought was very important in these times, and it was from Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, who said, "Seek the sacred within the ordinary, seek the remarkable within the commonplace. Is not the Song of Songs at once a love song and the holiest of all sacred teachings?" So my wife and I are very cognizant of that when we take our walks during the day on the beautiful trails that are here in the Berkshires. And just one other comment with respect to gratitude, those teachings that you shared, Rabbi Gurvis, are really beautiful. Something I came across that I'd probably forgotten was that gratitude is not complete until it is expressed. And when we shared that 2 weeks ago, again, that helped, and I think it was very helpful to other people. So those are my comments. I look forward to hearing the rest of the learning today. But again, thank you all so much.
Thank you, Alan. Wonderful, wonderful. The truth is there's such treasures within the Mussar tradition, and Rabbi Nachman is not a Mussar, he's a Hasidic teacher, and yet I use his teachings all the time in my Mussar teaching. And I have a whole database on every midah of material, you know, choosing 2 or 3 here. So thank you for sharing those, because the answer is we each find our own. I have one Mussar group, they come up with their own focus phrases and share them with one another. Judy Snook has asked the question, how do I find a study or Mussar partner? Judy, I'm not ignoring it. I'm going to come back to it. So I'm going to leave it right there because it's part of what's going to come in a few minutes. Let's see if there are any other questions or comments. You seeing anything?
I'm not. Why don't we talk about truth?
Okay, so we'll talk about truth. It's a tough one. Truth, for years now, not just now, for years has felt to me like one of the most challenging of the midot. So Alan Marinis and Rabbi Avi Fertig, who I've mentioned, both of them, my teachers, and Alan was the founder of the Mussar Institute. Avi is the current director of Mussar and really runs the Mussar Institute on a day-to-day basis. Write that Rav Salanter, who I mentioned, the founder of the Mussar movement, defines truth as when something follows the path for which it was intended without veering to either side. It's an integrity, which is its own separate midah that I'm actually working on with one of my groups right now. But it's that you are really balanced enough to stay on that broad center path. And Rav Shlomo Volbe, who was one of the great Mussar teachers of the 20th century, probably the teacher I quote more than anybody else. Alan mentioned a few moments ago hitlamdut, which is not a midah per se, but it's a Mussar technique, was invented by Rav Volbe. Rav Volbe defines hitlamdut as learning from your own life experience. What have I learned from my successes and my defeats? What am I learning from my existential reality? Hitlamdut is ever present in Mussar. So Rav Volbe writes, the most basic parameter of truth is consistency. Truth requires not only that there be no discrepancy between knowledge and awareness on one hand and reality on the other hand, but that there be no contradictions within a person's essential nature. When a life is consistent and has integrity, then it can express truth. That's a statement worth some meditation and maybe even journaling in our complicated time. The path of consistency and integrity must lead us to stand others on truth. We are called to bring others to their truth, to allow them to realize their potential, to enable each individual to live with consistency and integrity as the Tselem Elohim, the image of God that we each reflect, has fashioned us to be. So truth is tricky because we each have our own perception and interpretation of the truth. But we have to separate my opinion, my interpretation, from the ultimate truth, which, as Maimonides teaches us, is for us as human beings ultimately unknowable, at least in its totality. So we work at getting the best understanding of the truth we can, but there are different truths, and that's part of what I've gained, I would say, from paying less attention to the news, is not being whipsawed back and forth between the competing presentations of the truth. We were talking at dinner last night about the peak. And I said, you know, the reality in any of these cities is we're only going to know that we hit the peak a week to 10 days afterwards. Because day by day, the statistics change. It's only in hindsight when we've seen a consistent trend, and that trend is down, and the hospitalizations and the deaths are down, then we will know that in this locality, maybe we hit the peak. But the prognostication on a day-by-day basis, today will be the peak, today will be the peak. I don't mean to get political here, but that's hyperbole. That's trying to fill the empty space with news, and we need to step back from that. The truth will reveal itself, and we will each have our own different understandings of the truth. That's, you know, the rabbis teach us that there are 70 faces to Torah. Now, what do they mean by that? They mean that there are myriad explanations and interpretations of how different people will read the Torah. We Jews have always known that there's room at the table for different voices. But at the end of the day, sometimes we have to get up and determine a plan of action and live by that plan that we all agree to work towards. And we don't have that so well right now in hand in our nation. I'm hoping that we will get there. I just want to show you one other teaching on truth. And this one comes from Rabbi Art Green. Some of you may know Art Green. Art is the rector emeritus of Hebrew College and the founder of the rabbinic program at Hebrew College, has this wonderful book called These Are the Words. All of Art's books are extraordinary. And on the subject of truth, you see the letters Aleph, Mem, Tav, that's the word truth. Truth, or emet, is God's own seal. According to the rabbis, the letters of the word constitute the first, middle, and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Truth has to be broad and open enough to encompass all letters, all words, all of existence. By contrast, sheker, which means lie, consists of 3 letters huddled together at the end of the alphabet. They make their own closed little circle and do not allow the light of truth to shine in. To get anywhere near understanding emet, there has to be a broadness and there has to be room for different expressions of opinion, of fact, of data, and of open and vigorous decision making. But when you circle the wagons and it's only 1 or 2 opinions or 1 or 2 voices that matter, and the rest is background noise, you're not broad enough to be creating emet. Rav Salanter once said, "When I was a young man, I wanted to change the world. I found it difficult to change the world, so I tried to change my nation. When I found I couldn't change the nation, I began to focus on my town. I couldn't change the town, so as an older man, I tried to change my family. Now, as an older man, I realize the only thing I can change is myself. And suddenly I realized that if long ago I had changed myself, I could have made an impact on my family. My family could have made an impact on our town. The town's impact could have changed the nation, and I indeed could have changed the entire world." We are living in the second paragraph of his teaching. We are in a living laboratory where we have the time, if we take it and seize it, and the capacity to change ourselves for the better, to be the best version of the people we are meant to be, or we have determined we want to be. And since we're living in such, many of us, not all of us, some live alone, intense time and space with our families, in doing that, we can change our family dynamic, our family communication, our family interactions. And as life begins to open up, we pray as soon as is safely possible, our changed families can have an impact on our town, on our neighbors, on our synagogues, our communities. And maybe our towns can change the nation and thereby the world. It's an interesting way for us to think about it at this time. So I mentioned that I would share some resources, and again, I'm hoping that Dara and Rabbi Hirsch will happy to make the whole presentation available. 3 organizations, the Mussar Institute, the one that I work for, and Judy, in part, answer to your question. The Mussar Institute may be able to help you find a Chevruta partner. I would also suggest that you start with your own rabbi if you're part of a congregation in the community in which you live, or you're welcome to write to me, and I may be able to help with that. But the Mussar Institute has a host of programs. We have just finished doing 4 programs on Mussar in a time of crisis. If you go to our website, they're all right there. 4 teachers have written essays and also done podcasts based on the essays, and then live webinars with our Institute membership. And later this afternoon, we're actually doing another session for our Chaverim, our friends, the members of the Institute, who we're going to have an opportunity to unpack our Passover experience together. But we also have courses and programs. Some of them are led live in cyberspace, and some of them are self-paced. So you're welcome to come and check out what's available there. The Institute for Jewish Spirituality, likewise, has wonderful programs and has made resources available in this moment. And I would urge you to also go to their website. Hebrew College in Newton has what's called Open Circle Jewish Learning. It's adult Jewish learning, and it takes on different forms and different topics. And I'll tell you that of the many offerings, all of which at this point are virtual, I don't think there are any new offerings right now, although CJP and Hebrew College, our federation here in Eastern Mass, and Hebrew College have offered a series of one-shot programs, and all the recordings are on the website at Hebrew College, and you can go and participate and take any of those. I was actually the opening of those sessions in an earlier version. You've gotten a much more expanded version of this presentation. That seems like years ago, but it was probably about 5 weeks ago. But they will have programming that will be starting up over the summer, and I'm imagining some of it will be virtual. And we don't know what the fall holds, but it's possible. And there are more Mussar groups than anything else that's there. There are history, and there's Bible, and there are Hebrew language. I mean, there's all sorts of offerings, but the largest concentration is adult Jewish spirituality. So check that out. I don't believe you have to live in Eastern Mass to participate in those programs. The chart that I showed you, the periodic table of midot, of mensch traits, comes from a film called The Making of the Mensch, and there's the website, and you can check it out. And you can just go to letitripple.org. You don't even have to put the rest of that link there. You'll find it under films. Your synagogue. Not everybody on this call, I'm sure, belongs to a synagogue, but there are synagogues near where you live. And you know what? All of our spiritual communities are opening to reaching out and helping whoever comes calling. So reach out. And I've also given you my email address. And I'm happy to answer questions, maybe make a shidduch for a chavruta partner, or to help you find an on-ramp to a Mussar program that might serve your needs. And though I probably shouldn't mention it, Rabbi Hirsch and I are hoping that I'll be back at Chevra, either virtually if we have to be, but hopefully live this summer to offer a number of different Mussar programs. Here are 3 books. There are many. I actually have a 2-page list I could send as well, and happy to do so if you write to me. But here are 3 books that I would recommend if you want to learn more about Mussar or even start on a very slow level. Everyday Holiness I mentioned. There are 3 parts in that book. The first part is the whole history and background. Where did Mussar come from and how did the movement develop? The guts of the book are, I don't know, about 20 different chapters on midot. They're relatively short and all easily readable. And then the third part of the book is, if you really want to do something with this, how do you do it? By contrast, Alan's other book, I'm only mentioning 2 of the 4 here, Everyday Holy Day, is 1 page. Each week has a midah. You get 1 page. That's a pretty small book. That's about life size there. And just a few thoughts and a reflection and a prompt for some journaling and space for journaling. It's a great book to take a slow step by step if you want to focus on some of this. There are lots of other books like that. And then the book that I mentioned before, because it's the newest edition, the Mussar Torah commentary. And actually, if you want, the Mussar Institute is doing a series online, free and open to anybody, and the second one of the 3 is coming up, I think, in 2 weeks. I'm the moderator, actually, and we are featuring teachers who contributed to the book, 2 teachers in each session. So again, if you go to the Mussar Institute website, you can still sign up for that series. You'll get the recording from the first one, and you'll be welcome to join the next 2. We don't need to dwell on that. I want to, before I see if there are any last questions, I want to quote from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Rabbi Sacks was the former chief rabbi of Great Britain, And he is one of the amazing teachers of our generation. I've had on, I think, 2 occasions the opportunity to study with him in person. And this is an important quote for our time. We want to know, what can I believe in? Who can I trust? What's going to be? How long is this going to last? Will my family be safe? Will I be safe? And we just don't have the answers to a lot of those questions. Rabbi Sacks writes, faith is not certainty. It is the courage to live with uncertainty. That's a really important message at this time. Faith does not mean seeing the world as you would like it to be. It means seeing the world exactly as it is, yet never giving up the hope that we can make it better by the way we live. And that is one of the central themes of Pesach. One of the central themes of Pesach. B'chol dor vador, the Haggadah says, in each and every generation, we are duty-bound to see ourselves as if we had personally gone forth from Egypt. Friends, we are in Egypt. We are trying to get out of Egypt. Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim. The root is tsar, narrow. And the rabbis play on the word Mitzrayim by saying it's the Meitzarim, it's the narrow places. We are, some of us, in the narrowest place in our lives we have ever experienced. And the only way we're going to get through and out of here is by not giving up on hope and by doing it together. And this effort by your federation is an important part. It doesn't need to be the last part. So what do? I'm not going to read you the rest of Sacks. You can read that when they send you the slide deck. But seeing the world as it is and not giving up the hope. We always end the Seder by saying L'shana ha'ba'ah b'Yerushalayim. And Harvey Fierstein, for those who watched last night, had a really, it was wonderful by the time he got to the end of it. Wonderful interpretation. We want to be home. Whatever home means to us. That's what next year in Jerusalem means, he said. We want to be home with our families. We want to be in the room with our family and friends. Another colleague in Jerusalem sent a prayer just before the holiday, and she said, next year in Jerusalem, the healthy. That's our prayer for all of us, for all of our cities, whether it's Great Barrington or Pittsfield or Lenox or Sherborn or Jerusalem. Wherever you are, Sarasota, I saw someone was on. Needham, I know, is here. Ashland is here. So we want next year to be better than this year's experience. We've done a good job of making do with the circumstances. Let's not be satisfied with that. Let's continue reaching out and making the efforts, and in the spirit of Rabbi Sacks, making the next chapter whatever it can possibly be. Last sentence. A lot of people talk about this as the new normal. I don't like that language. I call it the now normal. We yet have the chance to build our new normal, and may we do so.
Amen. Thank you, Eric. So we do have some time for some questions. I'll mention, as far as you've referenced this a few times, just right quick in terms of housekeeping. As soon as you send us the slide deck, I will send out an email to all of the participants, to everybody who registered in the webinar today, with all of the links live in an email, a recording of today's webinar so people can go back and hear your glosses on the teachings themselves.
Share it with others.
We'll be sharing it broadly. We'll be putting it on YouTube, so it'll all be live and public. So please do take some time to go through those resources, and they are all coming to you probably later today or sometime tomorrow. So let's go ahead and have some time for some questions and answers. Naomi Schwartz asks about a group that had a discussion of Mussar in a time of coronavirus.
Yes, the Mussar Institute did a 4-part series called Mussar in a Time of Crisis. So if you go to mussarinstitute.org, I think it's actually the central block on our homepage right now, and there you can access, at the very least, you can access the 4 essays, and podcasts. It is possible that the links to the web sessions that followed those essays and podcasts are also there. You can write to me.
Barbara Vinier wants to know about the role of feedback from others as we work on our midot.
Yeah, I answered that. That was in tandem with an earlier question.
And Jan Zimbler, I'm going to unmute you here in just a second. And please, if you have a question, go ahead.
I didn't have a question. I just went over the hand thing, but I have to say this was a really good introduction to Mussar. It was very user-friendly for somebody who has not done any type of Mussar learning, and it definitely piqued my interest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ellie, please. 1 second, I'll unmute you here, Ellie.
Can you
Ellie,
hear me?
good morning. We can hear you now.
Okay. I just wanted to, first of all, thank you very, very much for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I must admit that I learned a lot, and it provided an extremely great experience. Before I really provide any comments, I have to think about this for a period of time because it was very in-depth, and I appreciate it incredibly, especially at these times. It was perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellie.
Naomi Schwartz, please.
Yes, I want to just echo what was just said by Jan and Ellie, that I've heard about Mussar, but I didn't know very much about it, and it seemed like something off in the distance to me, that it wasn't something that was tangible. So I do appreciate your presenting it in a way that made it very, very much easier to understand and to have a grasp of what it's about. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
It looks like we have a couple comments in the chat box also, which hopefully folks can see. Franny Licata writes to the panelists, and I'll read this for everybody. Thank you. Mussar truly helps me to identify and change the content and patterns. My automatic pilot thoughts, deeply resonating with our Hasidic sages in a belief that everything is gam zu ha-tov, that everything's going to be for good as well. Yes. And the Simons also write this morning, no pun intended, but I feel so much gratitude for this opportunity to learn with all of us today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And Debbie Harris writes, to anyone interested in joining a Mussar group, within Hebra, we have a lay group. You can send an email to her. If you're looking, as Rabbi Gurvis mentioned, for the other opportunities that the other congregations in our area have as well, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to, and also reach out to the other clergy in Berkshire County, because we have lots of opportunities to continue to learn and grow with Mussar in context. Maybe I can wrap us up right quick for this morning. I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. I want to say thank you again to Derek Hoffman and the Jewish Federation of the Berkshires for sponsoring today's talk. And of course, Eric, thank you for bringing your insights and wisdom. Speaking personally, I needed this today. So thank you for the context. You connected this back to Passover, but I'm also thinking about the Omer. And as a nechemta out of this, it's so easy going back to your idea of hakarat ha-tov to focus on the negative. But when we look at what we have, the Omer presents itself as an opportunity to lift ourselves out from that moment of redemption towards something else. And that something else in my mind is revelation at Sinai. That will be celebrating in 40 some odd days as we count the Omer one day at a time, heading in that direction. And so as we find ourselves in this time of isolation, which is still a remnant of Mitzrayim, of the narrow places, to be able to find insight in this midbar, in this desert in which we find ourselves, I'm tremendously grateful for. So I want to say thank you to that.
And let me just add to that, that the Mussar Institute for many years has had an Omer offering. It's available to anybody. So again, on the website, you can click and link and put your email in, and every day you'll get an email. And we've tweaked this year's Omer offering, and many of the other organizations are doing this as well. But this year's has been tailored to this time that we're living through.
Thank you. So let me say thank you to everyone. Let me wish everyone continued health, primarily happiness as well, ease as we move through this time. I, for one, am praying that we are going to be in 3 dimensions together soon enough. Because while it's good to be socially distant, even via tech, it will be good to be together in 3 dimensions more so soon enough. Dara, any last thoughts for us?
I just also want to thank Rabbi Gurvis and all of the participants today. I agree with Neil. I really needed this as well. And there's some incredible things that I want to carry forward and share with other people that I know are struggling as well as we move through this. So we can also make this available in our e-blast out to the broader community for in the next week once we get the materials. So I'm just grateful for being with all of you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Stay safe.
And hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Be well.